Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Jose. I am a software development engineering test at CAP. I am here with my colleague, Jennifer Castro. She is also an experienced automation specialist. And today we are going to discuss the testing of an AI chatbot application. We are going to demonstrate a testing framework that we create from scratch using various AI services to test this application effectively. Um, as you can see, our agenda includes the testing approach that we follow in this testing, that quick test execution demo, and we're also going to see that test report that is generated by our test cases. And finally, we are going to talk about some findings that we discovered through this testing process. Now, Jennifer is going to talk about that testing approach.
Hey everyone, as Juan Jose mentioned, my name is Jennifer and I am here to talk about the testing approach that we implemented for this chatbot application. The first element in this process, which is very important and is key, is the dataset that we are using. In this case, it is a CSV file that contains 4 columns. The first column is a list of questions that are sent to the chatbot. Then the next one is the expected answer that it was already validated for the team or for the product owner or the owner of the process in order to say, well, yes, this is the expected answer for a specific question. Then we have the list of keywords. Those keywords are going to be validated in the final chatbot answer. All of them are going or should be present, but we are going to talk a little bit more about it in the validation section. And finally, we have this style. The test uses this style in order to rephrase the original question and change the wording of the question and apply a specific style. In this example, we can see that we have 2 rows. The first one contains original. So it means that the question is not going to be rephrased, it's not going to be changed. The test is going to send the original question that we have in the first column. But if we have other options, like, for example, simple or formal, the original question is going to be rephrased, trying to apply this specific format, and that question, the question that results with the modification, it's going to be sent to the chatbot. The idea here is that we are simulating a more realistic scenario because in the real life, final users, are going to send questions in different ways. The questions can be long, short, very simple, sometimes some keywords, sometimes very formal, and the chatbot needs to be able to answer no matter the format or the style of the question. The chatbot needs to understand the meaning of the question and be able to return a correct answer. Now I want to talk a little bit about the different validations that we implemented in this case. It's important to mention that the validations were defined based on the necessity of the chatbot, based on the purpose. We analyzed the goal of the chatbot, and based on that, we recommended those 3 validations that are going to help us to know if the answer is accurate. The first one is the keywords. I already mentioned that we have a list of keywords in the CSV file. The keywords that we have there for each specific question is going to be validated in the chatbot answer. If one of them is not part of the answer, the test will fail. It's important to define correctly the list of keywords that are here, because if we include something that could not be in the answer, well, the test will fail, right? Also, if we define or if the person in charge of this process defines that it's not needed a list of keywords at all, we can keep that cell empty and this validation won't be performed, won't be executed. The second validation that we have is the emotional tone. Here, what we want to demonstrate or validate is the chatbot is answering using a correct tone. It can be positive, negative, or no, sorry, positive or neutral. Negative, it's not an option. So if the chatbot answer in a negative tone, the test will fail too. Here we are using artificial intelligence. In this case, we are using an artificial intelligence model, which is discriminative, in order to categorize the answer in a group. In this case, we are talking about 3 groups, right? Positive, neutral, and negative. If the test is in the negative group, it's going to fail. And finally, we have the answer accuracy. If you remember, I mentioned that in the CSV file, we have the expected answer. Well, here's where we use that information in order to compare the expected answer with the chatbot answer. Again, we are using artificial intelligence in order to define or see if both of them are similar. Here we are validating that the chatbot answer has a correct meaning. It's returning the information that is expected. For this case, it uses or it can be configured depending on what we need, because the range of this validation is between 1 and 0. If it is 1, it means that both answers are completely the same. But if it is 0, it means that are totally different. In our case, we are using a threshold of 0.5 in order to give some chance to have differences in the answer, different words. Because every time that we send a question, even if it is the same question, the chatbot is going to answer probably with different wording. Same meaning, but different wording. And this is exactly what we want to validate. Both answers should have similar meaning, but they maybe cannot have the same wording, the same words, right? And finally, something important to mention here is that we can add or remove validations depending on what we need to test. In this case, we are using the 3 validations. If for some specific case we don't need one of them, we can remove it. And also, if we need more validations, here's where we can include more. And we are going to talk a little bit more about it in the next slide. In this diagram, we want to share with you the big picture of this process, especially summarizing all the information that I just mentioned. Important to say that we are using data-driven test, which is an automation methodology that is used to, or basically it uses a data source in order to guide the process of the testing. In our case, our data source is a CSV file. And here the CSV file guides or manages the tests that are going to be executed. In our case, it's the combination of question plus style. Why? Because every style that we include for a question will generate a new question, and it's going to be a new test to be executed. The framework contains 3 layers. The first one is the communication layer. Then we have the AI layer, the artificial intelligence layer, and the validation layer. Each layer is implemented individually. It has its own logic. So if something changes in each one, it should not affect the other layers. For instance, in our case, we are using Jupyter Notebook in order to connect, send the information, send the question to the chatbot, and get the answer. We are using it right now because the application is in its early stage of implementation. But if an application has an API, here is where we can configure the connection with the API. We can authenticate. We can implement the different requests in order to send and get information from the chatbot. And that modification should not affect the rest of the framework. In the artificial intelligence layer is where we have the different models that I already mentioned that we used for different processes or different stages in this process. For instance, we use a model, as I said, to rephrase the question using an style, or also we have a couple of them to validate the different things or validate the answer of the chatbot. And it brings us to the validation layer where we include the different pieces or different validations implemented. As I mentioned, we can add or remove validations depending on the objective. One example is that if our application contains very specific data, which is not static data at all, it's something that can change. For instance, if I ask, can you tell me the number of employees we have in the company? That answer is not going to be the same at the beginning or at the end of the year, right? And that information can be obtained from a database or an API. So here's where we can include a data validation layer in order to get that information and check that it is part of the answer. Once all the tests are executed, it generates a report that includes very detailed information for the QA team to check if everything was executed fine or if they need to report any bug. Now Juan Jose is going to show us the demo of this framework.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I would like to mention that, as Jennifer said, we are using Jupyter Notebook to run our test cases. That's basically because, yeah, we are still in a very early stage of that development. So at this point, we don't have any endpoint, we don't have any API or any other method to interact with the chatbot. Basically, in the Jupyter Notebook, we have everything that we need to communicate with the chatbot, and in the end, to be able to execute our test cases against the chatbot. So that's why we are using a Jupyter Notebook. But of course, the idea is that we're going to move our framework to a repository, and that we're going to include these test cases as part of a CI/CD pipeline in the next step or in the next phase, once that we have an endpoint to communicate with the chatbot. Now we are going to see the CSV file that is going to be consumed by our framework. As Jennifer mentioned, we are following a data-driven approach. So it means that each row in this CSV file is going to be an individual automated test in the end. That's very important for us because that way we can check information for each specific case, and we can debug each specific case. And yeah, in this case, for example, we have in the first 4 rows, we have just one style defined in the CSV. So it means that these questions are going to be sent to the chatbot in the same way that you are reading here in the file. So we're going to use the original question. In the last row, in the last question, you can see that we have defined different styles. So for example, we have the original, the basic, the formal, and informal style. So it means that for this question, we are not going to have just one test case. We're going to have 4 different test cases. We're going to have one test case for each style. And we're going to create a new question on the fly for each style. So we're going to rephrase the original question based on the style. Something important also about this data-driven approach that we're following is that you can see it is very flexible and scalable as well. So if you want to add more coverage, you just need to add more rows in this CSV file, and those new rows are going to be executed as a new automated test in the end. So it's very easy to add coverage, let's say that way. Okay, now we are going to see the test case structure. Okay, this is the test case that we are executing. The first thing that we can mention here is that we are using PyTest, as you can see in the first line. PyTest is our main testing framework. It is a testing framework in Python, and it offers different features that make our life easier as a developer or testers. For example, in this line that you are seeing here in this test case, basically we are implementing the data-driven approach in the code. So it means that with this line, we are reading the CSV, and as I mentioned, each row is going to be converted into an individual automated test. Then you can see that we are also, we have some annotations about Allure. Allure is our reporting tool. As Jennifer mentioned, it generates a very dynamic and detailed report that we are going to see in a few minutes. So that's why we have these annotations here in the test case, because we are adding some information to those test reports. Also, as part of this test case, we have defined some steps. The idea with these steps is that we are going to have a human readable test case. So the idea is that people, even without a technical background, they can understand what the test case is doing. So in this case, you can see, for example, in the first step, we have show test data. So basically, we are just logging some information that is important for the test case that we can also use as in a debug process, for example. And then in the second step, we have a generate question. This is a very important step because in this step, we are using generative AI to create new questions on the fly based on the style that was defined in the CSV. Okay, in the third step, we are going to send the chatbot question. We're going to send the question to the chatbot, and we are going to wait for the response. And once that we have the chatbot answer, we are going to perform the different validations that Jennifer already mentioned. Again, if we can include more validation if that is needed, and we can also remove validation if that is needed according to the project requirements, to the client requirement. So that's totally, we can modify that is required. So the framework is very flexible in that sense. Okay, now we are going to run these test cases. For that, we are going to just to click on the play button in the top. As I mentioned before, right now we are doing this test cases execution in a very manually. But the idea is that once that we have an endpoint for this chatbot, we are going to move these test cases, this code to a repository, and we are going to also include these test cases as part of a CI/CD pipeline where we can ensure that our chatbot is still working fine after some changes in the code, right? Okay, the execution is done. We can see that in this case, we executed 8 test cases in total, and it took around 30 seconds. So as you can see, it is very fast. It is around less than 5 seconds for each test case. So for example, imagine running those test cases, running those 8 questions manually. Definitely, it is not going to take 30 seconds. It is going to take probably some hours. So the framework is also very efficient in that sense. Okay, now we are going to see the report that is generated by these test cases, and Jennifer is going to talk about that.
Now let's review the report that is generated after all the tests are executed. As Juan Jose mentioned, we are using Allure. which is a very powerful tool that takes the information generated by PyTest and show that information, and it can be used by the QA team in order to identify if the tests executed are working as expected or if there is something that needs to be reported. In the overview of the alert report, we can see the number of tests executed, in this case 8, the percentage of pass and failed scenarios, and also we have a trend graph that shows information about the different executions using the history. Also, we can see the total number of passed and failed cases. If we click on one of them, for instance, in the past cases, it's going to redirect us to the list of the cases that were executed correctly. Clicking on one, we can see the parameters that were used during the execution, for instance, the expected answer. Also, we can see the different steps that Juan Jose already showed us in the demo. And clicking on one or in any test, you will get more information. Also, something important here is to identify that here 4 of the 5 test cases executed are related to the same question, but the style is different. Here, if we see the question, can you tell me if there is a group at Gap responsible for promoting healthy habits, was sent to the chatbot in the original way. But also it was sent using a formal style, a basic style, and also an informal style. For instance, in this case, if we read it, it says, you know if there's a group at Gap that promotes healthy habits. The wording is different, but the chatbot is able to identify the meaning of the question and returns a correct answer because more tests already passed. It means that the 3 validations were fine. It was able to find the different keywords, the tone was correct, and also the meaning of the answer is similar to the expected answer. If we go to the list of failed cases, here we have, as example, 3 failed cases, 1 per each validation. The first one is related to the keywords. And basically here, the test is trying to look in the chatbot answer, which is this one, those keywords or those words, and they were not part of the answer. It's why the test failed. Even with one that is not in the answer, the test is going to fail. Also, we have another validation, the similarity or of the accuracy of the answer. And here basically it's using the expected answer and is compared with the chatbot answer and trying to see if the meaning of both is the same or similar, right? Here important to mention that it's not trying to see if it is exactly the same wording because as we mentioned, every time that you send a question to the chatbot, probably you are going to get a different answer, but the important part is the meaning of it. Here in this example, if we open the log to the question, what is the purpose of the social team? The expected answer is this one, which we can see that is short and straightforward, but here the chatbot answer is long. It has a lot of information and it doesn't contain the same meaning that we have in the expected answer. It's why the score of this validation is very low. It's close to 0, 0.3. And our threshold is 0.5. It's why it failed. And finally, we have the analysis of the tone. Here, the chatbot so far is answering using a correct tone, but here what we did in order to show you that this validation is working is that we are using mocking data in order to return a specific answer. If we see the question was why this chatbot was created, the answer is it's none of your business. In this case, definitely it's a negative answer and the validation was able to identify it. It's why this test failed. Well, here I summarized the result and the information that we can see in the report and how this information can help the QA team to identify the next steps after one execution has finished. Now let's go back to the presentation and to the last part of the presentation, actually. We want to talk about some findings discovered during this process. One of the important things and the goal of testing is that during the execution of different tests that we have as part of the CSV file, we were able to identify issues in the chatbot answer that were already notified to the team. So the team can fix them and improve the quality of the application. Also, we can say that it's an approach completely functional and scalable. Why? Because in this case, we can see how if you have your questions, and even if you need to add more, in this case, we have only 6 rows. Well, we already executed 8 tests. But if you have 300 of questions or even more, you can include them in the CSV file, and it's exactly the same process. So it doesn't matter the number of questions we have. And in the case that we have too much questions, and if the chatbot allows parallel executions, we can include the parallel runs in the process in order to reduce the execution time. And finally, we can say that the QA automation testing plus artificial intelligence is key. Both of them are key in order to validate the how accurate is an application like this one. Why? Because if we think on testing it manually, definitely it's going to be a painful process that is going to take more time and probably won't be able to validate the different things that we are incorporated automatically in this framework. So yes, basically it's the information that we have. Thank you very much for your time.